Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Anthropuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Michael Hicks. He graduated from the City University of New York, Hunter College, with a master's in anthropology, and from Drexel University with a bachelor's in design arts. He is currently working as an anthropology practitioner and documentary photographer. His photojournalism/documentary work covers the visual documentation of general news, historic events, natural disasters, poverty, and societal change. Areas of anthropological focus include visual anthropology, technological modernity, slow/structural violence, and environmental sustainability. How are you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing well. How are you, Addie?
I'm doing great as well. So what exactly is it that you do and why is it important in anthropology?
So I'm an anthropology practitioner and documentary photographer, trained in the 4 subfields of anthropology with emphasis on cultural political aspects. The areas of focus include technological modernity, slow structural violence, policy analysis, development, visual anthropology, environmental sustainability, labor rights, poverty, medical anthropology, and geopolitical relations. And in terms of importance and whatnot, it's my belief that to understand the underlying functions of any business or organization, one must consider its interconnectedness to society and human interaction. Trained anthropologists delve into the often unseen nuances of sociocultural connections and try to make sense of the inherent chaos that exists between human organizational systems. From there, we can develop solutions to multifaceted problems and consult from a cross-disciplinary perspective. Anthropological perspectives are most important due to the dynamic nature of society. Culture and perceptions are constantly evolving and restructuring in a globalized society. So it's important to understand these changes and adapt or pivot when necessary.
Okay, so what does your day-to-day kind of look like?
So this can vary depending on the project or projects I'm working on. It can be as mundane as gathering qualitative research material through books, science journals, and news, or as exciting as doing field work in unfamiliar and sometimes dangerous environments. Photo editing can be time-consuming when working on documentary projects. I'm also writing as well, even if not for publication. But my most recent full-time endeavor lasted 3 years and focused on assisting a nonprofit organization with poverty mitigation research through data analytics. The aim of this role as a data analytics manager was to gain qualitative insights into the reduction of abject generational and situational poverty rates by providing utility and housing assistance to individuals and families at risk of homelessness or currently homeless. My daily duties in that role included managing our CRM platform, troubleshooting issues related to participant intake, and staff training related to capacity building within the org. Unfortunately, I was laid off in May of this year due to rollbacks in federal and local grant funding, which supported my salary. Most of my time now is spent actively pursuing new full-time opportunities and battling AI algorithms, so my resume is actually seen by someone.
I can understand that struggle. I was unemployed for over 4 months and I had applied to probably 200 to 300 jobs. And it was like immediate rejections. And I'm just like, these have to be seen by AI. There's no way that a person saw this and then within an hour, they're like, no, not you.
Absolutely, yes.
So you mentioned one of your daily duties was managing a CRM data platform. Is that cultural resource management or does that mean something else?
A CRM generally means client relationship management, but what that was at the org was, all the pertinent data that came in regarding a specific client that was applying for services with us. So it's very important, obviously, to protect people's, PPI information and make sure that that information is, is secure and, only seen by the people that need to be working with the client at the time.
Now, why did you get into this career path? Like, what kind of led you here?
It's a pretty long story. I chose this career path in general terms to gain deep insights into human cultural interaction and behavior. In my youth growing up in North Jersey, I was always interested in history, art, activism, skateboarding, and music. I can't say I was a good student and regret not taking advantage of certain opportunities when they arose, but I began my current trajectory after completing an undergraduate degree from Drexel University, where I majored in photography and began a minor in anthropology. I moved to New York City in 2005 and started a career in photojournalism. Early on, I spent 2 years assisting photographer artist Harvey Lloyd and 2 years as studio manager for photojournalist James Noctway. While working full-time, I began honing my visual style by doing some small photo gigs or just constantly shooting street photography and protests for practice. I started networking with various photo editors within the photojournalism world to initially get my name out there. And then after gaining a solid business and visual aesthetics sense, I branched out on my own as a full-time freelance photojournalist. This led to working in the field for over a decade, shooting for news and commercial publications, nonprofit organizations, and web-based content. I specialized in the visual documentation of general news, historic events, natural disasters, poverty, and societal change. I would often travel and work on long-term photo essays on spec, then pitch the completed story to publications once completed. When not traveling, I'd cover daily news in New York City. I started graduate school at CUNY Hunter College after becoming somewhat burnt out from the constant stress of trying to acquire photojournalism assignments. This was mainly due to the lack of funding publications were providing at the time rather than exhaustion. Plus, a lot of the work I was getting wasn't very meaningful in terms of the vision I set out to accomplish in the medium itself. So I stopped seeking photo assignments and focused 100% on anthropological research. I was able to do this by taking on student loan debt and working part-time for a friend who owned an art sculpture foundry in Brooklyn. While in grad school, I was torn between pursuing an archaeological or cultural concentration. I decided to focus on the cultural political side due to my relevant experience in photojournalism prior. So I still took courses in archaeology related to Neanderthal demise and climate change throughout deep time because I wanted a well-balanced understanding of these issues in historical context due to the current ecological and political crises of present day. So the aim was to use anthropological theory as a vehicle for generating solutions to these societal problems. My thesis advisor was Mark Edelman, joint appointment faculty professor of anthropology at Hunter College and CUNY Graduate Center. My second reader was Aminata Marisa, currently professor of anthropology at Fordham and NYU. I had additional department advisement from Yukiko Koga, currently an associate professor of anthropology at Yale. And my professors at Hunter encompassed a wide spectrum of expertise from agrarian studies, medical anthropology, legal anthropology, and beyond. I wanted to leverage my photography skills to my advantage and incorporate visual anthropology into my thesis project. So I landed on a project based around electronic waste because of its relevance to environmental degradation and structural violence. I was awarded a DART grant to aid in the completion of my fieldwork. I was always fascinated by border regions and cross-cultural effects of these geographic spaces. I chose to do my fieldwork in the border region between Tijuana, Mexico and San Diego, California to evaluate the flow of e-waste from the US to Mexico. The thesis revolved around the interconnections of consumers, e-waste recyclers, and e-waste workers living in poverty. And it showed how visible versus non-visible violence takes shape over time. Now, after completing my graduate degree, I worked in the private sector for a few years and did some photo work here and there, but struggled to find work directly related to anthropology. So my wife and I decided to leave New York and move to Philadelphia in 2021. Philadelphia has a 22 to 25% poverty rate, depending on, whose figures you're going by, and which is substantially higher than most cities in the US. So I felt my experience and anthropological training can be effectively utilized in addressing this issue specifically in government, city government, or private sectors. This led to working in the nonprofit sector up until 2025, as mentioned earlier. And I'm currently exploring new research opportunities in the Philadelphia region or elsewhere.
Do you wish there were things you had known when you were getting into graduate school working as a creative, like in photojournalism?
Yeah, this is a question I've often pondered, actually. I was already well into my 30s when I began grad school. So this level of maturity was actually advantageous because I had a general idea of what I wanted to accomplish within academia before starting. So I had a solid understanding of how the world operates and had interactions with numerous cultures. Working in a place like New York City exposes you to many cultures, and working in photojournalism allowed me to interact with people and places most people never actually get the chance to see. So if I had gone to grad school in my 20s, I don't feel I would have had the same outcome And, it's kind of a ridiculous concept to be expected to know what you want to do with the rest of your life between the ages of 18 and 25. I'm still trying to figure that out, but some of it is due to circumstance and some due to learning experience. I understand that most anthropology students see grad school and acquiring a PhD as the prerequisite to success within that field. But I would argue that most students coming out of undergrad are not equipped with the necessary experience yet to capture their full potential. So this is in general terms, of course. Some students are the exception. But I would advise any student coming out of undergrad to do some exploration in the world before diving into further education. Travel to places of interest if you have the means. Join the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps for a couple years. That's always an option. Or simply spend some time outside your comfort zone to gain deeper understanding of a specific issue. And as always, having good mentors will help immensely. So listen and be open to advice.
Yeah. And you had mentioned when you first moved to New York and started in photojournalism, you had worked for Harvey Lloyd and James, is it Natchway?
Natchway, yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
It was a really great experience, actually, because, I gained not only deep understanding of, how the business of photography works, but also working with somebody like Jim, for instance, who's well known for his work since the 1980s. He's been to almost like every conflict since then and is still working to this day. And having that resource and guidance with my own work, or like showing him work of mine and like having critiques and like learning the craft really helped propel my own work and helped me see things from different perspectives. And I think it was definitely a good experience. But there becomes a point where you have to, decide, are you going to keep working for people or are you going to branch out on your own and do your own work? And I think that was, having worked for these two photographers really helped me figure out my own visual aesthetic and how to convey that information like as my own unique style. So
are there any projects or publications you'd like to talk about that you've done?
Sure, yeah. I'll discuss two projects that I'm most proud of. One strictly related to my documentary work and the other combining anthropology and visual anthropology. So firstly, my photojournalism work in Haiti after the devastating 2010 earthquake and the resulting cholera epidemic 1 year later stand out. Haiti is arguably the most poverty-stricken and conflict-prone country on Earth. The issues that affect Haiti didn't develop in a vacuum, but are the result of centuries of colonization, exploitation, and political corruption. For me, this experience led to exposing the systemic causes of poverty, and witnessing suffering firsthand and documenting its impact has a lasting effect on your worldview.
So how did you navigate the ethical considerations when you were photographing like marginalized communities like Haiti?
Yeah, so navigating ethical considerations when photographing marginalized communities is always taken seriously, and everyone has their own process for navigating this concern. My approach varies depending on the subject matter, place, and depth. So, for instance, for photojournalism work, it's usually fast-paced and an interaction with situations outside of your control. These situations tend to be more immediate, even though they stem from deeper issues. You want to objectively convey what happened based around factual visuals that will engage the audience into action or opinion formulation. For documentary work, the process is more in-depth and can encompass participant observation in addition to capturing moments. So when working on long-term projects, I speak with the people being photographed extensively, sometimes prior to taking any photos, or we'll have the camera in hand just to introduce the element. I want them to feel comfortable having me around and documenting sometimes very distressing situations. To accomplish this, they need to forget you're even there. And the idea of true observation affects someone's actions, even if not intended. So the idea is to become invisible and blend in so that you can capture the story accurately and as close to their reality as possible. Now, when working on anthropological research, it's much more regulated in terms of getting signed consent or reading a prepared statement of purpose to the participant in advance before their agreement to take part. You may have an institutional review board overseeing the approval prior to engaging in field work. English is my native language, but if I'm working with non-English speakers, it's important to either be fluent in their language or have a fixer or translator present. The most important thing to remember, though, is treating people with respect, understanding that there is a very big difference between experience and empathy. Just because you feel for a person's plight doesn't not mean you understand how it is to be that person. So you're coming into this with the goal of telling the story accurately and ethically. You don't want to run the risk of creating more marginalization for the participant. So protecting personal indicators is a method sometimes utilized. And the second project I wanted to discuss was my master's thesis entitled E-Waste in Relation to Geopolitical Forces, a case study of the United States-Mexico border region. And this is a detailed analysis that deconstructs the electronic waste industry and its interconnectedness to geopolitical forces and economic development. Now, e-waste is definable as any type of discarded or obsolete electronic or appliance that has reached its end of life cycle. My approach to the border region adopted a descaling model void of global focus to help dissect three distinct layers of interaction consisting of local government, upper, secondary electronics market, middle, and informal recyclers, lower. By setting parameters for the interconnectedness of local tiers, the model stays closer to a perceivable reality and away from globalized abstraction. Now, this method helps explain how the e-waste industry functions on a micro scale. So these layers of interaction create a new form of frontier best described as a meta-frontier, a land caught between economics, law, and morality. A meta-frontier exists not because of its qualities, such as right resources, but because of unique regional interactions between e-waste industry sectors. So meta-frontiers do not yield significant monetary returns, and its polluted territory is unsustainable for habitation. It becomes disconnected from the initial electronics frontier, and the end process creates its own micro-level space. My meta-frontier concept can be applied to further environmental studies where toxic material has impacted land, food, water, and human biology. A lot of the scholarly e-waste research past is generally focused on Southeast Asia and Africa, with little emphasis on Mexico. So my research aimed to bridge this information gap and help chart the flow of e-waste sent to or produced in Tijuana, Mexico. My main thesis questions were, is the societal process of speed mixed with constant growth industrialization fueling overconsumption of electronics? And is this issue creating a correlation between e-waste pollution and slow structural violence in Mexico? And furthermore, how does the e-waste industry influence geopolitical and economic relations between the United States and Mexico? And at the heart of this issue is the invisible and long-term biological and environmental damage associated with the blatantly visible amounts of e-waste spread throughout the world. So I concluded that the United States and Mexico use e-waste as a framework for profitability that spreads among a multitude of local sectors. These aspects and dimensions include geopolitical relations, economic policy, environmental policy, and slow structural violence analysis. A symbiotic business relationship exists between informal e-waste collectors, nonprofit collection sites, and for-profit recyclers. Each of these sectors has a specific function in the e-waste industry. Now, tensions between economy and human rights are caused by the interconnectedness of each sector. And these connections exist through the interactions of local governments, their legal systems, secondary electronic markets, and informal recyclers living in poverty. Now, the amalgamation of these sectors creates the basis for impoverished humans to become paradoxically deemed dispensable yet indispensable. And e-waste has relevant ties to development studies because it provides direct evidence of how geopolitical commerce, overconsumption, and poverty are connected. And e-waste can be a catalyst for the use of biopower by governing forces, and constrained agency of the marginalized is exacerbated by ever-growing elitism. So I've described informal e-waste workers as homo secur or bare life individuals to show in part how history often repeats itself. Now, this concept stems from ancient Roman times where certain individuals were broken down to nothing but their bare life and stripped of all rights in society. Now, the term was put into legal discourse by Giorgio Agamben, but to alleviate e-waste worker marginalization, attention should be focused on the invisible yet present aspects affecting them, such as toxic exposure and poverty. This can be achieved by advising business leaders and policymakers to take holistic approaches.
So I feel like I definitely know that globalization has probably exacerbated the issue, especially with e-waste, because a lot of countries, from what I learned, I had a chemistry course that I took last year or earlier this year. Yeah. And there was a whole section on e-waste, and it was talking about how a lot of countries will ship their e-waste to a different country for them to process. And it's usually like not first world countries, it's like third world countries and all that kind of stuff, because it's cheap labor. You know, they're not taking the precautions that the workers need in order to stay safe from the materials, but also like just the lack of information there is on recycling e-waste. Because a lot of us individuals, when our phones are done, yeah, we could trade it into like AT&T and get a new phone. Or if we have like batteries or old computers, normally those things you either try and sell on Facebook Marketplace or you just throw them away. There's not a lot of information out there, or there is, but it's not well known of, you can recycle a bunch of your electronics because a lot of the parts in electronics are really toxic
Yep.
that people don't realize.
And you bring up a great point because, a lot of the material is sent to global South countries, and a lot of it ends up in Ghana, Nigeria, China, Pakistan, and just to name a few. But exporters deceptively package functioning as non-functional electronics, like functioning and non-functioning electronics together, and disguise it as material for recyclable goods or donations to help bridge the digital divide of those countries. So what they end up with is a bunch of trash dumped on their, shores, that only a small percentage of that is actually put back into the secondary markets and then sold, to help bridge the digital divide. But they're still staying a step behind in terms of technology if you're getting older electronics or older technology. But, the effects that has on the country that it's being imported to is extremely damaging to their ecology and biology of the people that are scrapping the e-waste. And like you said, there's so many carcinogens in e-waste that is, builds up over time in bloodstreams and, creates long-term problems.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you mentioned that you've worked with policy-related poverty research. Now, what are some misconceptions that policymakers often have that anthropology could probably help them correct?
So my research often runs a delicate balance between functional economic systems and the human element that makes up that system. In my opinion, and through empirical data, on a global scale, the apparent differences between global North and global South economic disparity are often overlooked by many policymakers. Economics tends to be more important due to the business interests that exist within political systems rather than the potential harm created in the process. So dominance is not always the best option when looking at the security of all nations. This leads to conflict, and conflict leads to suffering. That suffering leads to generational resentment, wasteful resource expenditures, and less cooperation among the world's cultures and governments. When looking at local scales, you tend to see the same type of barriers directly and indirectly affecting poverty. Just from my work in the nonprofit sector, I could tell you that the issues of situational poverty often stem from lack of economic opportunity, access to higher education, and job loss. Abject poverty is directly affected by mental health and drug epidemics. Generational poverty is commonly the result of people becoming trapped in a system of perpetual hopelessness. So, employing anthropological perspectives into decision-making policy helps correct these issues by making sure people have a fighting chance of success. Why wouldn't you want to live in a society where its people thrive and contribute to the benefit of that society? This is done through education and providing the means for agency. When people have the means to support themselves, violence decreases, physical and mental public health improves, and the economy tends to flourish. However, there's so much nuance that can be applied to these very specific situations. Of course, no system will ever be perfect, but the more we work towards beneficial outcomes, the more humanity will progress and eventually overcome these issues. This will never be achieved without implementing these core insights into practice. And unfortunately, I'm somewhat pessimistic that they are even taken seriously.
Yeah, with all the stuff that's going on right now, it seems that we're moving way, way far away from anything like that. And people don't realize, well, a lot of people realize, but the people who are making the decisions don't realize how important education is. Like, I have a friend who's a high school English teacher, and she's like, 80% of these kids can't read. And it's because we're trying to follow a standardization of like, this is how you teach every student when not every student learns like that. So I think anthropology is definitely helpful in coming in and saying like, hey, because we're so used to taking the outside perspective of looking in, these are some things that, we could do that could make things better. And then the people who are in it, they're like, no, that's too easy, or that's too difficult. I don't want to do it. But I think anthropologists need to speak up a little bit more in addressing some of these situations, especially with policies, because I feel like our insight is never either taken seriously or we're just not listened to.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with what you're saying. And our insights are important and they need to be taken seriously, before things spiral out of control. I mean, they already are. I mean, they have in the past too. There's nothing new. But if we're going to get stuck in this cycle of fixing a problem and then that problem resurfaces a generation later or even before that. I mean, you're really just putting a band-aid on the problem instead of creating a viable solution to that problem.
Yeah, no, exactly. Now, do you feel that by obtaining an anthropology degree or even just learning about anthropology has broadened your viewpoint of the world?
Oh, absolutely. Anthropology has broadened my knowledge and understanding of humans and their interactions, both past and present, in countless ways. By studying cultures of the past, you can infer predictions for the future. I try to exercise foresight while remaining aware of any historical or structural context associated with specific issues. My main methods include descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive modes of analysis. By identifying a problem, we can predict potential outcomes and course correct by utilizing prescriptive solutions, or even better, prevent the problem before it occurs entirely. I'm always analyzing things, maybe too much, as those that know me best would like to point out, but there exists this inherent need to understand where certain issues stem from and what can be done, or if anything should be done, to create the best possible outcome for all on a global scale. And critical thinking is your best option when addressing these larger matters because, there's so much nuance to it and there's so many factors that need to be taken into account. And a lot of times they are not.
Now, before we get to our final four questions, is there anything that we haven't discussed today that you would like to let the listeners know about?
I guess like there's a couple of research ideas I've been looking into recently and just, in general. So I want to stress the importance of art, symbolism, and forward thinking from an anthropological perspective, roughly from the Pleistocene through modernity. I mean, these aspects are often overlooked in terms of importance to the growth of human cognitive function. Society tends to view art as something on the peripheral rather than an ever-present force driving our views and opinions. And I'm also very interested in the way global society is perceiving the present and how the present sways future predictions as definitive outcomes. So temporality, or the human relationship with time, seems to somewhat distorted these days. Our fears of the future are affecting the present, and by doing so, creating stagnation or sometimes regression. So nostalgic escapism is the first indicator of a bleak future outcome. So how do we cope with nostalgia and false memories of the past? And how do we move forward when false narrative became factual in the minds of so many? And these are dangerous times, and it's nothing new, but I want people to be aware of this before it spirals into complete breakdown.
I do feel that, looking at the past to like learn from your mistakes so that you don't make those mistakes again is something that like we're wholeheartedly missing right now.
Yeah.
It's almost as if instead of learning from the mistakes of the past, it's using the blueprint of the past to go with whatever's going on right now. And I feel like having accurate representation and information of what has happened in the past, especially like what's going on right now, I think will be super beneficial in the future because then we can look back and reference and be like, hey, so we did that. Don't want to do that again because it came with this outcome.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, one of the reasons why reading is so important. I mean, it's important to our cognitive function, but it's also important to our critical thinking skills. And when we're given this constant bombardment of imagery and false narrative or just visuals, like of constant stimulation, we're not really taking that in and processing it. We're kind of just in the moment, and that moment lasts forever. So there's no future. So I think it's very important to understand this distinction and, understand that there is so much polarization and that politics are treated like team sports now, where it's like one side versus the other. There's so much gray area in between there, and it's just insane. I don't know how else to explain it.
I mean, I think it was George Washington who said it was like a two-party system will destroy the country. And I'm like, Homeboy had some really great foresight.
Yep. He did definitely.
What happened?
That's forward thinking right there, you see?
Yeah. I mean, he didn't even know dinosaurs existed because or not until after he died. So, what is the best piece of advice that you would offer to someone who's interested in your field?
There's a few things. First and foremost, exercise critical thinking whenever possible. Your actions create change, not belief in change alone. And also try to exercise foresight when developing research ideas. Be creative and brave. The unimaginative will try to hold you back, so be true to your own vision. But also listen to, your mentors and teachers and whatnot as well, because they'll help guide you through that process. There's the old cliche, that sometimes you learn more from failure than success, but it's true. I mean, be open to the fact that each project will open new doors of perception and deeper understanding regardless of the outcome. And lastly, understand how evolving technologies change over time and be mindful when implementing these technologies into your work life. Something deemed revolutionary one day, it can become a complete disaster the next. So try to stay ahead of that curve. And, I'm mainly talking about like social media and things of that sort, where false narratives and a lot of misinformation can be spread to disastrous outcomes. So,
Yeah, definitely take the time to do your research and finding reliable sources, like whether it's peer-reviewed articles, scholarly articles, or something like that. Because I know a lot of people, they'll see something on Facebook and they're like, oh my gosh, the end is near. And then they're posting it and they're like, this is fact. And I'm like, no, that's not a reliable source.
Yep. And, the algorithms latch on to that very quickly. Like you do a search on YouTube for something and you're down a rabbit hole before you know it. So,
Exactly. Now, are there any changes that you wish to see in your industry or just anthropology in general?
yeah, there's quite a few. Firstly, more engagement by anthropologists in the political realm. Anthropology has so much insight to offer in terms of generating solutions to the world's problems, like we discussed earlier. I mean, we deserve a seat at the table in terms of policy and decision making. This will generate a more centralist perspective and less polarization. This entails separating religious elements from political elements, generating cultural understanding, and mapping impact around socioeconomic initiatives. Secondly, be more vocal about cuts to research grant funding in the social sciences. Empathy is strength, not weakness, but we must remain rational in the process and educate, but don't alienate. Third, encourage anthropological research into emerging space industries, ethical AI, and environmental sustainability. I feel like these three sectors are going to be very important in the near future, and students that are interested in research ideas should start to look into some of these. And from a fundamental level, promote anthropology as a viable career option and not just a pathway to academia. There's still a negative stigma that exists when it comes to pursuing a career in anthropology. When you're out of school and you're starting to look for your jobs and whatnot, always do thorough research into companies or organizations before accepting a job offer. Be mindful of its leadership, and if something doesn't seem right, walk away or don't even start. There's a big difference between adaptability and exploitation, so be aware of the differences when job roles are being outlined. Make sure you are fairly compensated for the role assigned to you. In terms of anthropology in general, I'd like to see social sciences taught in elementary schools. Exposing children to anthropological thinking will broaden their understanding of cultural awareness. I also think all business majors in colleges and universities should be required to take specific anthropology courses as a prerequisite to help them familiarize themselves with, some of the issues that they're probably not focusing on as business majors.
I think one of the points that you made about encouraging anthropological research into emerging space industries and AI and environmental sustainability, I definitely think those are really good points, and there's really good episodes on those. Now, what do you just absolutely love about your job and the industry that you've worked in?
So I love creating work that makes people think about the world around them. Nothing is more fulfilling than helping others learn how to change perspectives or giving a voice to the subaltern or marginalized. I also love that I'll never know all there is to know about the anthropological field. I'm constantly learning myself, and we're all learning. I mean, if you're not, then you're lying. And this opens up new ideas for future research. And there's so much potential for cross-disciplinary research, and like you were saying earlier, anthropology touches on so many different facets of society and culture and humanity in general. So it's important, and we need to stress the importance of that.
Yeah, of course. Now, finally, where can listeners learn more about you and what you do?
So my master's thesis on e-waste can be viewed or downloaded at academicworks.cuny.edu. Additional anthropological writing can be viewed at my writing blog, which is michaelhickswriting.wordpress.com. My main photography portfolio can be viewed at mhicksphoto.com, with an additional link in the contacts section to my photo blog, mhicksphotoblog.wordpress.com. On Instagram under the name Michael Hicks _photo_anthro. And I can also be found on LinkedIn.
Okay, cool. And I will definitely link all of those. So if anybody's interested in checking it out or hitting you up so they can get some, perspective on photojournalism or anything like that, that'll be there for them. But I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me on anthropology and all the topics that come with it.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And, thank you for the work you do. It's very important having this podcast out there, especially for people coming out of, undergrad or going into grad school as well.
Yeah, it was great having you on here. And it's definitely a topic that isn't talked about a lot, like especially photojournalism and e-waste and how anthropology pulls into that. So I think a lot of individuals are really going to enjoy the episode.
I hope so.
Yeah. Awesome. Alrighty. Well, then I guess I hope you have a great rest of your day and I'll talk to you soon.
You as well, Abby. Take care.
All right. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of Anthropuzzled. This show was produced by me and distributed in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, L. Akers for the incredible logo design, and to Anthropuzzelled's intern Fiona for the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letzinger@anthropuzzled.com or as Anthropuzzled on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time.